Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to continue our discussion on population growth by sort of taking a step back and tying the niches and the species characteristics all back to their evolution. And so the way in which those organisms have evolved to survive in their given habitats and fill the roles that are their niches in those ecosystems, we end up kind of seeing these very interesting life history patterns or these ways in which those populations grow, reproduce, and survive within their lifetime, as well as looking at that from a collective population. And so we can talk about something called survivorship curves. And these are just some basic patterns of how many individuals sort of survive at different points within a life cycle of an organism. And so we see these three basic patterns, your type 1, your type 2, and then your type 3. And what you're really looking at here is the maximum percentage of lifespan expected given for the number of survivors that are there. So most organisms, when they are first born, assuming they make it to that point, that's where we'll start. And so we assume 100% survival rate. Um, but as you continue to move across their lifespan, adding 10, 20, 30, 40, 50%, or if we want to think of these as years, um, you can see that in different cases, those drop-offs in terms of survivors either happens very quickly, sort of is relatively level over time, or tends to happen much further out into their life. So when we look at something like a type 1 survivorship curve, right? We see that for the most part, there's not much infant mortality, right? They generally make it at least halfway, if not over halfway, before the curve really starts to bend down. So they generally survive 50, 60, 70% of their lifespan for the vast majority of the organisms in that population. So there's low infant mortality, and as a result, a much older average age for the population. This we tend to see in terms of types of organisms. We'll see this much more commonly in larger mammals, as well as organisms who are willing to or have evolved the ability or necessity even for parental care. So these guys are ones who probably don't have a whole lot of offspring, but spend a lot of time, energy, and resources taking care of those offspring to help ensure that they do, in fact, make it to adulthood, to that reproductive age, at which case they can then continue to perpetuate the population size. So we as humans would fall into a type 1 curve. Um, Big mammals like elephants and lions and those sorts of organisms would also fall into a type 1 curve. We do not have a whole lot of offspring per se, but we spend a lot of time and energy in a long period of time caring for those young, and as a result, overall have a much more minimal infant mortality rate and a much older population instead. Type 2 survivorship curves are sort of more equal survivorship rates across all stages. So you will have some infant mortality, you will have some die sort of in mid-age, and you will have that typical death rate towards the end. So it's very much a linear pattern as opposed to sort of either dropping off very quickly at the beginning or sort of staying steady and dropping off at the end. So when we look at type 2 curves, we're talking about a little bit more in terms of probably the number of offspring that they have. There might be some minimal parental care, but it's not like what you would see with a type 1 type of organism where it's long periods or long chunks of their lifespan spent caring for their young. So we're talking about things like birds, small mammals, mice, and things like that, perhaps. Some reptiles could also potentially fall into a type 2 survivorship curve. Type 3, on the other hand, are organisms where it really is just sort of have as many babies as possible, hope they make it, and produce the baby and say good luck, right? So very high birth rates, but as a result of that, Also very high infant mortality rates. So most of the offspring produced never really get to that reproductive age or don't get very far into their reproductive cycle before they, in fact, are dying off. So we're talking things like invertebrates, fish, amphibians, most plants will fall into this category. Most of the offspring are going to die from predation, so you tend to see a lot of relatively small prey species fall into this type of survivorship